Hey, we want to welcome you guys to our virtual event today. Really excited to be diving in. And what we want to talk about today is marriage, and how that marries itself with medical missions. How does marriage and medical missions, how those work together? And really excited. We have several amazing couples here that are going to be sharing their story. And we're going to go through a series of questions and really hope that this is a fruitful and beneficial time for all of us. Just be encouraged and to see, gain a perspective, and to see what marriage looks like in this. And the truth is, marriage is an adventure, and you throw missions into that mix. I'd say it's 20 times an adventure if you couple those things together. I'd like to start us out here with a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. So, Lord, we give you such thanks for some incredible people that are serving you around the world in so many different creative and amazing ways. And Lord, we know that marriage is an institution designed by you, and we know that you have a charter to take your message to the world. So you intend all of this, and we submit it all to you, and we ask that you would fill us with your heart and your strength, and especially your wisdom, and how we go about running after this in a way that is glorifying to your name, Lord. So, Father, thanks for this time that we have today to dive into this conversation. So, for starts, what I like to do is we're just going to run around, and we have everybody here on Zoom. Doug, why don't I start with you, and then if you'll pass it to someone else, let's just do introduction couple by couple. And then we'll dive into our questions right after that.
All right, very good. So I'm Doug, and this is my wife, Ruth Lindberg, and we are both family physicians. We currently live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with our two kids who are freshmen in high school and a sixth grader. And we served in South Asia and Nepal for 4 years and have now been back in the U.S. for 10 years. And we learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, grew together during our time overseas, and just excited to be here and talk about that some.
So I'm Willie, and this is Jessie, my wife. We are I'm a general surgeon. She's a pediatrician. We served in Mexico, in the northern area of Mexico, with an indigenous tribe in the Copper Canyon for 3 years. We've been back about 2.5 years now. We met when we were children in the mission field. Our parents worked together in the mission field in Peru. I am from Peru originally. And so it's always been a dream. It was a shared dream to become missionaries, medical missionaries one day. And the Lord thankfully opened doors. We served with Samaritan Spurs post-residency program first, and then transitioned to Christian Health Service Corps. And we have 3 amazing daughters, Lucy, Caroline, and Emily, and they are 6, 4, and 2.
Yeah, John and Angela Condi were also a general surgeon and pediatrician. Interesting. And we have been we served for 34 years in a mission hospital in northern Pakistan with TEAM, the Evangelical Alliance Mission. We have 4 children, all of whom are married and living in the States, and 8 grandchildren. So we have a long journey. Our kids were 5, 3, and 1. Our boys, when we went to Pakistan, and then our daughter Hannah was born there, and then they all grew up there and ultimately came back, did their studies in the States, and are settled here now.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's dive into some questions here. What I want one of the first question is I'm going to ask a question on health. Like, how do you find health in this combination, in combining global missions work and marriage? Just talk to me, like, how do you effectively have a healthy marriage in the midst of something that's so demanding?
I think one of the things our family thought about when we realized that health, was potentially rapidly deteriorating with all the demands we faced overnight arriving to the mission field is kind of what our long-term goal was. That was to remain healthy over a lifetime of ministry and not just a 2-year term or 3-year term. And so we found this practical tool that kind of helped us. And we called it the tier system. And it was kind of like a secret language that Willie and I shared to be able to navigate some of these urgent requests that were placed on us at many times. And so we borrowed it. It's actually from it's a pastor named Craig Rochelle. But the way we kind of talked about this as a couple was tier 1 would be the things that were absolutely like mission critical for our family. And if we didn't accomplish those things, our plane was going down in flames. And we've all seen it happen. So for us, that was like dates. It was time with God. It was quality time with our kids. And we always would tell each other, this is something that's important. And then we talked about like tier 2 things, like what would be strategic for us for the longevity of the mission here. And for us, we decided that was like investing in training people or the spiritual development of the people in our community. And those things were important. Maybe they didn't seem very urgent sometimes, but they were important. And then, you can imagine tier 3 were things that were less vital. But it was interesting, the tier 4 things, I think a lot of us experience on the field would be things that are often externally presented. And so I remember one day, we got a knock on the door and there was a missionary colleague who needed Willie to urgently do elective surgery on a pack of wild dogs that were roaming the hospital compound. And it was an urgency, but we were able to look at each other and say, that's tier 4, and it doesn't have to be our family emergency. So it's hard. This is just a hard thing. But I think helping put things in order helped us maintain those healthy boundaries.
I think we felt like we started even before we went to the mission field with habits of dating, even doing weekend to remember kind of events, just reading books together. We were in that habit. Of course, when you're outside of the resources that you have in America, you can't do as much of that or some of those things. But we found more recently even that we could use an app we've been using called Lasting that's got us kind of talking when we go on dates. Sometimes we find it, or at least I find it difficult to know what to talk about, how to engage in a conversation. So developing habits of interacting, dating, conversing with whatever you have available to you. That's it.
How many years have you all been married?
43.
43
and a half.
I'd say I think that's a really encouraging thing that you just shared, and sometimes it's a struggle to come up with questions or what, like that you use an app. I love that. I think that is an encouraging to younger people that are because it is. It's like, hey, I need some more triggers and some more questions or whatnot. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So even old dogs can learn new tricks, I guess. Yeah.
Our favorite dates, I know it sounds crazy, but our favorite dates was to go to McDonald's this is not a commercial, but I go to McDonald's because they had AC and you could get cappuccino or a hot chocolate and sit, and they had Wi-Fi, so we could do that.
So as you're pursuing a healthy marriage, how are you still effective in your work and ministry?
I think there needs to be a lot of communication in terms of identifying priorities, because there are endless needs, and when you come as a couple who are both medically trained, you have theoretically twice as much professional capacity to meet those needs, but you are still two human beings and with very finite, energy and attention and whatnot. And you still have responsibilities at home for your family and your children and other ministry involvement. And so, I think that longer term effectiveness requires, pacing and good communication about who's doing what. Having realistic expectations that are allowed to be revised and revisited over time, as circumstances change, and sometimes that needs to be daily or weekly. Just communication. Even as Ruth and I were kind of preparing for this, we agreed that communication piece and kind of revisiting what we're doing and talking about and being open about how each of us are doing is an important lesson we learned. I'm not saying we did it well all the time, but I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, any other thoughts there? That balance, that effectiveness, and all the different spheres. And we talked, you've got professional and you have marriage, but there's also your spiritual health. I mean, there's a bunch of areas of health that we would talk about. And I don't know that I've ever seen that Scripture talks about balance, but we're trying to find a balance, and it's a tough thing. I appreciate that all of you all have shared specifics of things. Like, it's important to be able to ask questions. It's important to reevaluate how we're doing in communication. It's important to have, I love the tier system idea of being able to say, like, to have an evaluation of something that's objective, because it's life hits you very subjectively, and having some objective things there certainly can be a help. Talk to me about what are the beautiful blessing in who God is, and how He's given, I'll call them paths in life. There's singleness and there's marriage, and both of them have amazing opportunities to be able to serve the Lord and to know the Lord and to love the Lord. Here we're obviously talking about marriage. So what are some of the uniquenesses that that marriage allows on the mission field to be able to minister and to I'll say to move the gospel forward?
We have found that a number of our believing friends, we are able to deal as a couple, so that John is able to put to deal with the man, and I can deal with the woman. In a Muslim country, that's basically what we do. And we do find that having us as a couple is really a help.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good point.
And we have a joy of working together. We've had situations, where I'm going to do the emergency C-section. Angela comes along for the baby. Those kinds of interactions are something we can share I think in a mission setting that we would never have experienced in the States. I would always be in a different world doing surgery from what Angela's doing in pediatrics, but there we actually can interact with each other, and so there are joys and aspects of that work that can bring us together, help us be together.
Yeah.
I think also just you have the opportunity to model a healthy Christ-centered relationship to other people, and that is part of what Christ came to do, was to heal our relationships with one another, and for people to have an example. Not that we did it perfectly, of course, but how do a Christian husband and wife interact with one another? How does a Christian father treat his children, or a Christian mother treat their children? And just the that picture of family that that we were able to provide.
Yeah. And I think also, speaking specifically as medical couples on the field, we saw this during our training too. I mean, there are struggles in terms of like the schedules and demands, but we really understand each other, when there are emergencies, or there are acute things, or when there's something that's an emergency, I got to go do this. The other one can be like, no, it's not, and can help call you on that. And so just being able to relate to one another professionally, and even have someone else to kind of run things by, and Ruth and I are in the same specialty, so that was helpful to have another brain with the sort of same sort of training that where we could discuss cases. Now we didn't bring work home a ton, but so while there were challenges in terms of demands, there were real blessings there too in terms of really getting one another.
I think it also gave us a measure of rest sometimes because we didn't have to do it all. You know, I could kind of hone where I was going to invest, maybe let's say in malnutrition education, and then also be present with my kids. And I knew that Willie was going to be covering other bases. We could complement each other.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the distribution of roles, because as a couple, we had to learn to interact and communicate well with each other. And I think that really helped us in the ministry because, just like the body of Christ, everybody has unique strengths. And so we complement each other that way. She's great at writing. She's a great writer. And so she would be the one to write the support letters. I'll be manning the fort, watching the kids, answering medical questions or whatnot. So, I mean, just kind of having that kind of clear distribution of roles in knowing, learning to know each other's strengths and where to support each other, that really helped us. And I think that was something that was unique that we could bring to the field together as a couple.
Mm-hmm. So you heard kids mentioned a few times. Talk to me a little bit about how professional work, ministry work, marriage, how have those changed over in the different seasons of life? Kids as a seasons of your children, but just how have things shifted, and what have you seen as, I'll ask maybe like advantages and challenges as seasons have changed?
When we first went to Pakistan, we did language study, and then I was at home with the kids homeschooling, and John went off to clinic or to the hospital and worked. And I think I was figuring out I homeschooled about 9 years. And then as the kids were going off to school, then I'd be able to work some in the clinic. And sometimes they were off in boarding as well. And so life changes as the kids got older. And then several times we had coworkers that would watch the kids or teach the kids 2 days a week so I could work in clinic. So we had to, every year was a little different. Yeah.
When we moved to Nepal, our oldest child, our daughter, was 4 months old. And, we had some expectations and understanding of what the hospital was going to be like. We had been there as short-termers, but that was before children. And so, when we got there, we just got a pretty huge dose of reality, just knowing like we have no help with our kids. And there was just no way that both of us could spend a significant time in the hospital. And so Doug was full-time. He became medical director of our hospital within a couple of weeks of us getting there. It's just situations happen.
And the longest tenured physician after we'd been there.
And so I was home full-time with our daughter, and occasionally would go into the hospital when they really needed someone to help with certain skills and tasks. But that was just the season of our life, and accepting like we have limitations. There's limitations in the situation that we're in where we didn't have help with the kids, and being flexible with that.
It definitely wasn't what we anticipated. Again, it was an adaptation based on the realities of the circumstances, which was far from what we thought our circumstances were going to be when we got on the plane. But yeah, that was what God was asking us to do for that chapter of our life.
So the adaptation to the idea of house help is another one. In America, we've got technology that helps in the home. and there you don't have as much of that. And so being willing to just say, we've got to do that, and you have to deal with all the problems then, of course, of a person rather than a machine, who's got personal problems and all that. But without it, there's really I think that we could have been healthy in our relationship, in our family, when you have 4 children and they're young. So you just have to be willing to say, I'm going to do something. I'm going to adapt, much as you said, to a new situation, and use that's unusual, things like house help, for instance.
I think for us, it really was the process of adaptation, like Ruth was speaking to, and John. We had spent really our entire childhoods and then college and maybe 20 plus years of education dreaming about this goal of becoming a medical missionary, and selling all of our possessions and asking our friends and family for money. And then we get on the plane and we get there. And a lot of times there isn't the support like we have in our home country, with childcare and things. And so it's a jarring reality that one of us will probably need to adjust. And it was both of us at different times, but it was me and many times, and that was hard. And just encourage people who may be starting on the mission field. And I can speak as a mom, but I remember a particular moment when I had a 3-month-old at home and she was sleeping, and I got a knock on the door for a child who was unconscious in the ER. And so my normal helpers were out in the community. So I carried my baby on my shoulder to the hospital, and I got in there and I realized there was no clean surface to lay her on. And so she was sleeping on my shoulder. And I remember having the nurse put the stethoscope in my ears while I was holding the baby. And it just kind of hit me. I kind of saw myself in that moment, like, this is not okay. And the reality is we have limitations. We're very finite. And so the Lord really helped me. I think it was a process to grow into the realization that he wanted me to also be present with my kids. And I think it's a desire that grew. And I think that's a really valid desire and a really precious desire. I would encourage people that even if that's not what you expected, to trust the Lord in that process. Ultimately, I think it's an identity struggle for many of us who, we feel that our calling in life in obedience is medical missions. But I had to learn that God didn't need me to be a missionary pediatrician. And he didn't love me because of what I did for him and how many patients I saw. He loved me because he made me and I'm his daughter. So that was a process, I'll be honest, and a lot of trial and error across the span of years to feel the peace and joy that I have now as a stay-at-home parent. But I would say that was a real struggle.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, realizing kind of the season in life you're in. Like you guys said, I think that's a very common theme, kind of limitations, adaptation. I think for us also involved that we had 2 young children and 1 on the way, and we were involved in a lot of things at the hospital, and we had to make a decision then because we had to understand that a newborn child has a lot of demands that only a mom or a dad can meet. And it's wonderful. We had also house help, to help with things, watching the kids and whatnot. And sometimes, as wonderful as those people are, they will never replace us. And so we had to make a decision, and it was very difficult. Through a lot of prayer, actually, we decided to come back because we didn't feel that we could give our kids what they needed if we had a newborn at that period of time, because of the demands that we were having at the hospital and in the mission field and the ministry we were involved in. And, actually it all worked out. We ended up being that Jesse needed medical care. We didn't know that at the point when we had made that decision, but Jesse ended up needing medical care, being hospitalized for that pregnancy and whatnot. And so all that the Lord just being very gentle with us and reminding us, okay, just like Jess said, we serve the Lord no matter where we're at. And I remind always the girls, our mission field is where we are at. You are at school right now, that is your mission field. You don't have to leave the country, you don't have to take up an airplane to go anywhere. You can be a missionary anywhere you're at and serve the Lord. And so just, kind of knowing and understanding those seasons in lives and adapting, making, even sometimes they are very difficult decisions, but just knowing that God has put us here for a reason and that we are our children's best assets. So,
So let me take that and add to it. And the next question I want to ask is, let me give a disclaimer first. I'm going to ask a question about sending agencies, and we're all talking kind of in generalities, because even though everybody's connected to a specific agency, the world of medical missions is thankfully so small and so tight. So I'm going to ask the question in generality, but what do sending agencies have a difficult time being able to kind of know and understand about medical couples? Like, what's different about that, and what would you love to, like, man, I wish you all had a better understanding of this?
There are unique stresses to medical work of bad outcomes, sick patients, sleep deprivation, and these aren't understood by non-medical people. For example, one time one of our higher ups had said, well, why don't you just cut down on your medical work so you can do more evangelism discipleship? Well, it's hard to cut down on, your medical work. You have to do it at a certain level. And you have to see these patients, this emergency. You can't just say, oh, I'm doing this today. So so oftentimes non-medical people don't understand the stresses of medical people.
And I may lean into what you're just saying there. So I think there's you had a separation of two things, or you brought something to light that was a separation of the work that you were doing, and then this other category called ministry or discipleship. And I think even like lean into that a little bit, of the disconnect of what you're doing in healthcare is ministry. So like, talk to me about that piece of it.
Yeah, it can be seen definitely as a different thing. One, the medical side of it can definitely be seen as not ministry, but the technical thing that you do.
Right.
And of course, we realize that they do go together. As you're ministering medically, you're praying with patients, you're interacting with people at a deeper level. But there are expectations about what missions is in terms of things like evangelism, discipleship, church planting, which don't necessarily fit with a medical practice time-wise. And the other thing that Angela mentioned is the idea that there's a certain level at which you have to do medicine in order to have good outcomes that are themselves a testimony. And that if we back away from doing our work well enough to have reasonable outcomes, and of course we can't always determine outcomes, and then that becomes a negative for ministry. Then you're seen as doing less than what you should do in terms of medical responsibility. So that's a balance that's not often easy to strike, I must say.
I would say something that needs to be emphasized is that when you have a couple that's signing up with two medical professionals with the sending agency, it's not a 2-for-1. Like, you're not going to get two full-time equivalent workers. And, in our case, I was working more clinically and Ruth was at home more, but in other situations that I've known where people have been healthy, it's been, a balance at times. Generally speaking, it seems like one person does assume more of the home duties and the other is more focused on the professional to varying degrees. But sometimes it really is a split. but it definitely isn't a 2-for-1, you know? Yeah, it's harder and takes more time to accomplish tasks in majority world contexts. And life is just more complicated in some circumstances. And I think in general, sending agencies get that and teammates get that when you're coming onto the field. And yet, you know, like when it comes time to make the call schedule and you both have DO or MD behind your name and like we have to fill these slots, like how's that going to shake out? And our teammates going to be understanding and supportive. And you know, so again, back to the communication piece, it requires talking and being honest about where things are at and how you're doing. But yes, bottom line, it's not a 2-for-1.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I want to dig into the team side of it, but any other thoughts just in communication or expectations and to the sending agency? Like, what do you wish sending agencies had a better understanding of? Any other thoughts there?
No, I think I 100% agree. Yeah, I think the expectations that sometimes boots on the ground, you know, not it's easy to try to manage it with maybe a US, you know, sometimes people are maybe US based and they try to go to the field and whatnot, but being in there and not having the childcare that you need or the support to raise your family and to be healthy. I mean, because at the end of the day, you know, if you don't have a healthy missionary, they're going to burn out. The family's going to burn out, and it's going to be imbalanced. And I mean, I've heard of even situations where there was affairs because there was just this lack of balance in a couple. You know, trying to both, you know, run at 100%, then the kids are left at home, or the, you know, husband and wife are kind of going completely separate directions. But that's really important. Also, kind of a piece that is coming more into focus lately, which I'm very grateful for. But just the you know, the mental health support that is very, very important for missionaries. I mean, we are under a lot of stress, and having care teams assigned to us, but not only in that regard, but also as couples, I think it will be important. You know, I think just having, after we came back from our term, we went through Alongside, which is a counseling place where we did an intensive. And, you know, it really opened my eyes and our eyes to a lot of things that we had to deal with. We just kind of stuffed it under the rug. Even as a family, as a marriage, and to become healthy, you know, because I don't feel that you can serve God with your full potential until you are healthy yourself. And part of being healthy is, you know, involves that peace. And so I feel that missions agencies really should invest a lot more across the board, but especially for medical missionaries, because we experience a lot of secondary trauma that is very unique to medical missions. I mean, I don't think that there's a lot of missionaries who are exposed to daily deaths. I mean, there's, you know, you may be at a hospital and then you're doing surgeries, and, you know, like Dr. Connie said, the outcomes sometimes are not up to you. And so people die. People will die in the hospital. And that's going to affect you as a medical missionary very, very greatly. And how to deal with that. You know, a lot of times we're not taught how to deal with that in our medical training. And now you are in a place where you don't have a lot of support. And so providing that support for the medical missionary, I think, is a vital piece. And I do hope that continues to grow in the future.
You know, you talked about relationships with your mission colleagues, but there's also an issue of relating to your national colleagues. Yes, we, you know, worked as a couple, but there are other people who are nationals who work full time as well, but they don't have to deal with the language because they already have the language. They don't have, you know, mission responsibilities. They don't have supporters to write to. There are a lot, they might have family that's nearby that can help with the kids. So their issues are different. So if you're talking about making a call schedule, then how do you make things equal or equivalent? That's another issue that you need to think through.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah, you really you go through a list of the areas and things that are complex and that are challenging. So let me add to that and say so the teams that are on the field, like how can what would you say to teams? What's the ideal way to come alongside to support the medical people that are with them? Like what's the secret sauce or the ingredients that you think really help set medical individuals or couples up for success in terms of just a team that's on the field?
I mean, we had an example is we had a gal that was willing to help with homeschooling of our kids, and they were not in the medical work, but they just decided, that we needed that help with the number of kids that we were involved with, and so that person jumped in and did that, and we were so grateful for that
Mm.
help at that time. So it's being mindful of others and realizing that help is needed, and we had colleagues that were willing to do that.
Great.
Another policy thing that came up with us was the question of vacation. There was sort of a set policy about how many vacation days we were supposed to have. And yet we had medical personnel who were, of course, doing call. They were on weekends. They were doing more work in terms of time in their medical work and felt slighted in terms of the amount of time that they felt like they needed uh, more vacation and more break because they were doing more work. And again, it was hard for the other non-medical people on your team to necessarily understand that. And so again, it's a place for communication, and understanding, and I think we came to it got out in the open in our annual conference at times, and unfortunately, we had people who were willing to say, "Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and yeah, maybe do need
Mm.
some more time." On the other hand, I might say that some of our medical colleagues had different kinds of work ethic uh, uh, things in their own lives, were more workaholics, and felt like you should felt, felt like other people should be working just as hard as they are, and that's another thing that we
Mm.
really have to be very careful of, is that we don't assume that everyone is necessarily wants to work that way. And younger workers, we had younger docs that came out to work with us, and they wanted time with their families, time in their marriage, and
Our kids were already gone.
and we had to hear that and respond to that and say, yeah, you need that time with your family. And I actually got to the point where I could say, yeah, let me help offload some things so
Mm.
you can thrive in your own marriage and family in those early years that
Yeah.
we're out of now, and we're able to help with
Mhm.
that. So anyway, understanding.
I think with that comes helping other people draw and enforce boundaries is really important. Because when you're surrounded by these, like when you go into healthcare missions and God has called you into that and you have that passion, you have a drive and desire to to serve and to help. And when you see these desperate circumstances that people are in, like it's our natural innate tendency to wanna lean into that and to help. And yet, in order to do so over a prolonged course of time, we do need to pace ourselves and to acknowledge our finiteness and our humanness. And so yeah, you don't do that when someone's bleeding out, in on the OB ward and you get a phone call. You don't say, sorry, here's where I draw my boundaries. But there are there are other opportunities to do so. And again, like communicating with your spouse and then communicating with your teammate. And as a teammate, just revisiting those conversations with your colleagues and helping them to enforce their boundaries so as to ensure health and longevity and to allow them to thrive and be joyful in their ministry and not just to be hanging on by a thread over the course of time. So
yeah, I think it's helpful for teams and missions organizations to know like the type of person who and this is generalization, but the type of person who becomes a medical missionary is the type of person who will put other people's needs before their own. And they'll put their patients' needs before their family's needs, or what they even feel like is they need themselves. And so like for Doug and I, when he was pouring himself into the hospital and taking care of patients, and there were times when I'm like, I really need him as my husband, but then I feel guilty about that. It's like, but he's saving lives at the hospital. How can I ask him to spend more time at home? And it just felt selfish. So just knowing like those are the kinds of things, like what Angie, what you were saying, that we have these particular stresses and struggles. It's like that's specific. It's there's a lot of missionary couples don't have to deal with those life and death situations and how that impacts a marriage and a family. So.
Well, let me ask you this. We talked about children for a little bit, kind of in and out. To specifically ask the question, what are the challenges in raising children, and also ask for ideas, like how did you tackle this? But having two medical, a mom and a dad, that are in the medical field, on the mission field, what are ways that you strategize to raise children? What have you seen that's worked? What have the pain points been? Just talk me through that a little bit more.
It was really important for our kids to learn Urdu, and they learned it mainly with their friends on the compound. They all played with their other, the Pakistani friends, but also our house helper spoke to them just in Urdu. So they all picked it up. And that really helped have them have a love for the culture and love for the people to know the language.
And the balance of things, we've all admitted that we didn't do it right. And I think, for instance, Angela did not thrive in homeschooling. It was difficult. We had active boys who didn't want to sit and learn, and and I should have responded more to that and probably done more in the way of helping with that, in that area. So she's forgiven me, but it's all. I certainly encourage people, when you go into that, especially now, some people do well with homeschooling, but it's an area of it can be an area of tremendous stress, especially depending on the mix between the teacher, the parent, and the students, and how they are. So it's very different in each situation, but it's a major area to strategize about. And of course, nowadays there are things like video courses and stuff that may be a bit more, but there's more help maybe available, but it's a challenge, huge challenge.
Hey, John, I think that ties into to one of the sending agency pieces. Going back to that, I think for two medical couples, for sending agencies to place an emphasis on finding teachers, MK teachers, and even if that means for the healthcare missionaries to build that into their budget, because let's face it, usually the healthcare missionary is going to have more connections to donors who have more resources than a fresh college grad with an elementary education degree. So to potentially build some of that into your support or share it with other families to or find creative solutions to allow for some support with the education piece, because that is a common refrain amongst the two professional couples, where one is completely unable to function in their area of expertise, and not always by choice. Sometimes it's completely out of necessity and they're not very good at it, and everyone's just kind of struggling along, and it winds up being a reason people leave the field, not infrequent. And so I think it's strategic for sending agencies to keep that on the front burner for families with kids who are in that season of life, to potentially try and provide that support.
But this goes back to churches too, who think that teaching kids is not missions, and that sending them to, sending missionaries to do evangelism is more spiritual or something. But oftentimes churches don't want to support teachers.
All right, well, let me shift this a little bit and staying on the track with kids. What are ways that you can engage your kids in the mission work that you're doing? How do you invite them in? How do you educate them? Kind of like you're talking, like what's the ways that you vision cast for them? I mean, obviously your lives are vision casting, but how do you invite them into the ministry that you do?
I would say with like intentionality. I think one of the assumptions that's made is that because I live on a hospital mission compound, my children will be involved in ministry. And let me tell you, the potential for, watching Daniel Tiger all day or Sesame Street is just as high for your kids on the mission field than in America. And so we found that even with our young kids, we had to get creative and make space for that. And so we would deliver cookies to patients. And we had quite a panel of malnourished children in the hospital at any given time. And we would teach them to pray for them by name every night. So that was really special for us. And now that we're based in the United States, we travel with our young kids together and do missions. So it's what you can do in the season you're in. And even those small things make an impact, I think.
There's certainly a lot more that they can do as they get older. For instance, in the missionary kids school we were associated with, the senior high school biology class, which our kids were in at times, and so forth, would come down to the hospital for a weekend where they'd just see medical things, watch surgery, and sort of attach biology to what we were doing in medicine. And so that can have an impact in the lives of kids your own kids as well as other kids, as they think about what they might do in their profession in the future. So there are ways to invite, but again, that's a bit older kids. It's not quite the same as kids in early elementary.
Our kids were real little when we were there, but what we noticed was there was just this when people saw our children, there was just this connection and this warmth that would emerge, and that was sometimes hard to navigate because they wanted to hold our kid, and we're new parents, and they want to take our daughter and show her to people back in the kitchen in the restaurant. And we're like, is this okay? And ultimately we said, no, it's not okay. But that aside, I mean, there really was this connection and this warmth, even just from when they were infants and little ones, to involve our kids in helping us, do holistic ministry as a family and connect with other families, and allow people, to see us in that role, not just as professionals, but as parents. I think that was something that allowed for some increased depth of connection and warmth.
Our hospital staff loved our kids.
Yeah.
They just loved them. And getting we'd come we lived a little bit off compound, but I'd bring Maddie and James through, and say hi to Doug, and, for them to just be there as much as they were able as 1 and 4-year-olds, to be involved. And yeah.
And you put a 3-year-old in scrubs and parade her around the hospital. I mean, that is a hit every time. I mean, that just opens doors like crazy.
It's good.
And I think it also models family in cultures where when they see that we have kids and that we are a family and that it's important to us, then that means we share values with non-Christian families that we're visiting. They understand. I mean, they see what America is in media, and have a very negative view of who we are as Americans. And when we can be family and show marriage and love to our spouse, love to our kids, and that we enjoy family, that's an opener for the gospel, in my view. Another thing we did that was kind of fun. We talk about cultural adaptation. We went countercultural when it came to our relationship with each other. Public show of affection. We would hold hands sometimes in the hospital, and the nursing students would just start giggling and all that, because nobody does that in that culture. But they loved it, actually. They thought that was very special, that they really love each other and that they showed affection to each other. And I do things like, for instance, on her birthday, I didn't do this every year, but sometimes I have the chapel service, and then I pull out flowers from under the podium and call her up to say happy birthday, give her the flowers. Things that we can do that show our love for each other in other cultures are opportunities for ministry. So whether it's marital things we do or things with kids, it's a positive thing for sure. Hugely positive.
All right. Well, let me ask this one here. So you you add up all the things that you're doing on a daily basis, and we're around 50 hours worth of work a day between work and kids and family and everything else. So how do you add to that? How do you add all the responsibilities that are back in the States of keeping up with supporters and your connection with your sending agency, like everything that goes into the list of what's happening back domestically? How do you manage all that?
We sort of traded. John was really good at writing, and I'd do his editing of the prayer letters, but then I would write the thank you notes. So we sort of balanced that.
Yeah, I agree. Distribution of roles. She's really good at writing, and we use Facebook quite heavily. And so, she was the one who would write our newsletter, post, whatnot, communicate with supporters, watch the kids, and proofread her work and whatnot. So I think, at the end of the day, I think it amounted to a lot of staying up late at night together once we put the kids in bed, trying to get these things done. But it was a joy. It was a real joy.
And sometimes, this is a responsibility that falls into our laps, I think, by surprise. Sometimes as medical people, we have to become overnight, whatever, social media adapted or, MailChimp savvy. And it's hard. One of the things that helped us was just taking like a day or two, like a night in a hotel away from the hospital compound to like set apart to write our newsletter. And then we could go out and eat some really good chips and guacamole and take a walk with the kids. And we just kind of put a bubble around that task so that it didn't like invade the rest of our life sometimes, because it is work. And so that's something we did.
We never figured this out while we were there. We were bad at it. I would stay up late and I would disappear during family time and be a fundraiser and a recruiter and a, communicator. And Ruth did website development that she taught herself, or website building, and just all sorts of stuff that were just and we didn't really carve out work time for that. It was, and some of that was okay, but we never really found the right rhythm or balance with that. So I like to think that if and when there's a second term or another term for us, that we'll be a little better at it, carving out a half a work day a week or something for those tasks that are, work. But it's not easy. It's not easy to know when to say when either, because you're so passionate about this stuff and you want to share and you want to engage prayer and you want to raise funds and bring other people over and encourage them to come join you. And when you see success in that because of your efforts, there's a positive feedback loop there too. That's a good thing. But again, we're finite and need to acknowledge that you got to sleep, you got to spend time with family, and you have clinical responsibilities and other, ministry things that you need to do too. So that's part of it.
Jesse, I like what you had described with the tiers 1 through 4 framework. And like all of that stuff could go into that decision making process too, of like, there was some tier 4 things that we invested in that if we could do it over again, we could say, we could have put that on the back burner and it wouldn't have been a world ending. So, yeah.
In that same vein, I think, like one of the things like you're sharing, Doug, is you don't realize some things that are thrown in your lap. Like, for instance, if it's kind of hard to go whenever you go on home leave for, just it feels like you have this responsibility to keep engaging with the people that are supporting you, and a lot of them are drawn from your family, friends. And so you go back home and now you are kind of in that, it's kind of hard to really completely take a break and disconnect, because now there's people that want to go out with you. There's still people who want Facebook updates, and we feel like we have to keep putting, even if we're like, on a little getaway as a family, we still have to put that monthly update, so yeah, it's just something to also consider as, as medical missionaries, another added piece to the whole story and stressors that come with that as well.
All right, let me talk about stress there for a moment, and so were there areas in the work that you were doing where you ever felt resentful or taken advantage of in the expectations that were demanded of you from really coming from any angle? But talk to me about that, some of that emotion that might have been there.
Painful memories being dredged up here. I think I'll just say that for me, that was much more apt to happen if I was operating like at the end of my chain, and operate if I was running on fumes. And then if there was one more ask, even if it was like legitimate, and then it would be hard to not feel some resentment. When you're exhausted or hungry or tired or whatever, then even if it's legit, if a tier 1, if you will, you can still feel resentful when you've exhausted and depleted your reserves. So I think depleted reserves are a recipe for experiencing more resentment and that sense of being taken advantage of. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. There are some things that get thrust on you. Like when it was like not going to say it.
I think an area, for instance, that we experienced sometimes was decisions about priorities. Leadership might say, even within the medical work, that we need to be going this direction, and you might really feel like that's not the way we should go, so that I think that kind of interpersonal stress about priorities in the work and so forth it's always going to be there. You're always going to have people with different ideas, and So sometimes it was helpful for me to just say, that's not my area. I'm a worker in this particular situation, and I'm just going to accept that as the Lord's put that leadership over me, and I'm going to accept that that's the way they're going, and let that go. That was at least one way that I think we dealt with some of those things in our work. But I know that probably colleague to colleague stress and differences of opinion and so forth can be one of the greatest struggles in work and missions. And in medicine, where you've got people that are pretty clear about what they think and make definitive decisions, those kinds of stresses can be even greater within a medical work. So it's something to be prepared for, and there are times when there has to be grace and letting leadership, if you don't see it as being something that's dangerous or really ungodly, to let leadership lead and pray, Lord, use them to guide us, even though I don't necessarily share that view. So anyway, that's generally, I think, something I felt.
Good. Yeah, I think also I've, part of it is that you may bring a unique set of abilities, and even leadership. Like Doug, some of us were thrusted into administration out of need, and then the stressors that come with that. That maybe now you're, sometimes you come into a culture where there's them against us type situation, and then you now find yourself on that other side, just because now you're part of maybe the administrative team. So that can be quite difficult to navigate, not only for personally, but also for your family, because whether we like it or not, because we're in a close compound, in a close community, a lot of the things will go around, and we all know everybody else is what everybody else is doing, and so it will affect our family. And so that's one of the things that it was a challenge to navigate, for sure. To kind of trying to navigate. I remember there was a situation where a physician had to be let go, and I was part of that team and that decision. And it was because just a lot of uproar in the community, and it took a long time to kind of heal those wounds. But and the hard part is that the people who felt that it was maybe unjust, they were our neighbors, and sometimes they would stop speaking to us. And we had to, kind of bring those relationships and pray and be a person of peace. But I mean, I think those are the realities of living in overseas and kind of being part of this close knit community that, you eat together, you share everything together, but at the same time, any kind of problem just kind of is shared together and brings a different type of stress that sometimes you may not be prepared for. So yeah, this is difficult, but with the Lord's help, just trying to navigate that restoration of relationships, but it can be a very difficult situation.
I still think probably the most common one is just call schedules. Those are, I mean, it's very cut and dry, and again, the two medical couple, it's a sticky wicket when those slots have to be filled, and who's going to do it, and what that means for your families as you're filling those spots, and how people perceive it. So yeah, that can breed resentment if there's other tensions on teams.
The other stress is kids getting along with each other, like our kids with another couple's kids. And sometimes they got along fine, and sometimes they didn't. And then it's the mothers having to try to help the kids to get along. and maybe stick up for your own kid, but at the same time realize that they're not saints either.
Mhm. Good point.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up here. I have one last question for you, and you guys have been awesome. So let me fire one more out there. But what run around for each of the couples? I want to hear something that you're excited about in marriage right now for next season, whatever it is. It might be a weekend away, or just tell me something you're excited about for where you guys are.
So we're going to do a weekend to remember
Next month.
So we're looking forward to that.
Good.
Mhm.
That's great.
I would say two things. One is we celebrated 20 years this year.
Oh,
Mm.
congratulations.
And
Congratulations.
the other is I'm really excited because Ruth is writing a book about her having been healed from cancer,
Mhm.
which is a whole nother maybe a whole nother webinar. I don't know. Well, but the way the Lord worked in her life, and I'm just really excited for her to be able to share that story with others, and the journey that's been for her and for our family.
Mhm.
That's good.
We have a little cruise getaway. Looking forward to that. Just
Mhm.
thankfully, we have some very supportive grandparents who are going to be watching our young girls, and I think it's really important, just as a plug to something that we kind of learned, just that is multi-generational, that including as many people in raising our kids, family members, grandparents, in our case, has been really, really important. What they can offer and bring to the table is invaluable. But in this case, of course, they're watching so that we can go out on a little cruise getaway, which is very exciting.
And we're definitely like thick in the diaper changing season right now. And so we've been married 17 years, but something we have adopted is monthly celebrations. And this is as minimal as driving to Burger King to get a Coke. But we try to just, highlight that and encourage each other along the way.
Great idea.
Huh. Oh, good. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you all, and I want to just say thanks to everybody that's been part of this webinar or virtual event. This is such a vital conversation to have. Marriage is important. Ministry is important. Mission is important. I mean, just go down the list of the things that are important. And not only are they important to all of us having this conversation, but we know that they're important to our Heavenly Father. So it's, I think this is I think this is honoring that we're having these conversations. And the truth is, as we look at this, and at whatever stage that you are at, if you're in high school, college, kind of testing the waters a little bit about medical missions and marriage, or if you're in it, like wherever you are, I think there's a lot of wisdom. I took notes. I'll show you about. I took all kinds of notes. You're just thinking like, man, these are some great wisdom points that were shared. So I hope you did the same. I pray that this was a beneficial, useful time for you to be part of this. And I just, again, want to say thank you. So let me, last thing I like to do is I'd like to ask Doug, if you wouldn't mind, would you close us in prayer and just pray for everyone that's part of our virtual event here?
Absolutely. Yep. Lord, thanks for this time. Thank you for the privilege it is to live on mission for you. And thank you for marriage. I thank you how you've given us one another, the folks on this call. And I do pray for those who are watching this, be it live during the webinar or asynchronously down the line, that this would be a blessing to them and they'd be encouraged and equipped, and that you would work through this and take what's been discussed and help it to be an encouragement to them. And it's all for your kingdom, Lord. And we love you, Jesus. And I pray this in your name. Amen.
And
Well, thank you everybody for being here, and the crew that's on here. You guys are awesome. I sincerely thank you for being part of our time here together. So we appreciate everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at our next virtual event. Thanks so much.